I think one of your questions was, when did I start my career? Mm-hmm. I never did. I just paint for fun, and I paint because I like it, and I paint what I like.
Hey Islanders, and welcome to episode 84 of the Camano Voice. Today I speak with the Camano Island Artist and the featured artist of the Loft. Please welcome Betty Dorotik. Hi, I'm Brandon Erickson, and you're listening to the Camano Voice podcast, where I interview folks around Camano Island and beyond. If you want to stay up to date on events, businesses, and even hear a little history of this area, subscribe to this podcast and share with your friends. Thanks for listening. Hey Islanders, and welcome to another episode of the Camano Voice, where we release a new episode every Tuesday. On this episode, I got to speak with the featured artist of the Loft for the month of March of 2021, if you're listening to this in the future. So she's also a Camano Island artist, local right here on Camano Island. And she is, we've actually carried a lot of her cards that she actually makes up. We've carried them in the marketplace for quite a while. So I've known the name. I've never, and if I have met her, I don't remember it. So I got to meet her, officially and speak with her, and then obviously have this interview. And had a great time speaking with her. She's just had a fun history of growing up on a Texan farm, and then moving around, and then eventually ending up here, and then how she got into art. She also talks a lot about her husband, who passed away in 2019 before the pandemic all started, and kind of the struggle and dealing with all of that as well. So she's very deep and shares a lot in this interview. And so I hope you enjoy hearing a lot of the backstory of our featured artist of the Loft. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Betty Dorotik. Hey Islanders, and welcome to another episode of the Camano Voice. Today I'm here with a Camano Island artist. Welcome to the podcast, Betty Dorotik.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And before the podcast started, before we started recording, you were telling me how you pronounce your name from where you're from. Would you like to do that for the podcast?
My ancestry is Czech, and the Czech Republic, my grandparents called it Czechoslovakia. So my husband and I went to the Czech Republic to do a genealogy research for his side of the family. My side of the family is, my last name is like Smith in the Czech Republic, so there were like walls and walls of file cabinets that no way would they be able to find my genealogy. So I asked the guy that was talking to us, he met us at a coffee shop, and I said, so how would you say my name in Czech? And he said, your name would be pronounced Alžběta Dorotik. And I was just like, that sounds so pretty, and here I am stuck with Betty. So anyway, it's kind of sometimes I thought I should start that as an art name to sign my paintings, Alžběta.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
All right. So where did you grow up?
I was born and raised in Texas.
Okay.
South Texas, about 35 miles from the Gulf.
Okay.
In hurricane country, that's where all the hurricanes go, right into Matagorda County there. That's where I lived. So my parents had a 240-acre farm. My dad raised cotton and maize, grain crops, corn. He had cattle and sometimes pigs. My mom raised chickens. She had a huge garden that when I would get off the school bus, I would go to the garden for my after-school snack and eat like warm tomatoes on the vine and cucumbers. And she made sauerkraut, so sometimes I would go and open a jar of sauerkraut and have that for a snack. Yeah, I grew up all organic.
Okay. Before that was a thing, right?
Right.
Very cool. So then, did you have a lot of siblings then?
I was the youngest of 4.
Okay.
Wait, I had 3 brothers and a sister. 2 brothers and a sister. So I can't remember anymore. It's been so long. So I was the youngest. I was like 8 years younger than my sister. So I think I was probably an expected
Okay.
pregnancy.
Yep.
And I always felt bad that I was a girl because I could have been so much help to my dad if I was a boy. And I don't know, it didn't seem, I sort of hung out with him a lot, and went with him when he was going to the cotton gin and stuff. And I sort of hung around him a lot and helped him. He was building trailers and I would be handing him stuff, and
Yeah.
so I think he enjoyed having me as a girl.
Yeah. That's great. So then, did you spend a lot of your time growing up, like working on the farm as well, feeding animals, doing stuff like that?
Yes, I picked eggs, the chickens laid. We had a lot of chickens, and also a couple of roosters that didn't like me. Because when I walked into the chicken yard, the roosters came at me because they thought I was a threat to the hens.
Yep.
So I liked to hang on the fence and watch my dad milk the cows. And this one rooster, I would hear a noise and I'd look and it would be sidestepping towards me, coming closer and closer, and I knew it was going to attack me. So I started putting rocks in my pockets before I came in the gate, and I would throw rocks at them. But anyway.
Yeah, the ways kids learn to survive their chores.
You just, most people would not know what it's like to be threatened by a rooster, but I do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. So then, did you grow up like through high school down in Texas then?
Yeah, yes. Yes, because I lived on a farm, I didn't come from a town, so I went to school, grammar school, in a town called Markham.
Okay.
And then I went to high school in a town called Tidehaven,
Okay.
which was actually, that was the name of the school. The little town was, like maybe a beer joint and a beer joint, maybe two beer joints, and that was across the road from the high school, and it was called El Maton. Oh, they had a huge hall that they rented out for picnics and weddings and things like that. And then we grocery shopped in a town called Bay City, which is a larger town that I've run into people say, oh, yeah, I know where Bay City is.
Okay.
So it wasn't, everywhere you went was like on Camano, you have to drive.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. So then what was that like for you growing up there? Was like with hurricanes, everything like that, like how was all that growing up?
We had a lot of storms. They call them northers because they usually come from the north, and it would be, and they still have them in Texas, but not as many. They would come in maybe in the late afternoon, and the temperature would drop to maybe 40 or 30 degrees. And then the next morning, it would be cold, but then by afternoon, it would be normal temperatures again.
Okay.
And the hurricanes were a little different because they brought a lot of wind and rain.
Mm-hmm.
And the creek that I mentioned sometimes would flood.
Okay.
And actually, my parents used to live next to the creek. And when I was 3 years old, they moved the house further up, about probably a mile and a half away.
Okay.
To avoid getting water in the house.
Wow. Okay. And I guess down there, did they use like a moving company to move the house, or did like your dad have experience with that type of stuff?
No, there was a big truck. There's a picture of me outside, and this big truck had these. It would they'd jack the house up, and then they would back under it, and then lower the jacks, and the house be sitting on the rails, and then they drove it off.
Wow.
But I remember asking my mom, this was after I had kids, toddlers. I saw this picture of me in pajamas. I said, what time did the house get moved? And she said, it was like after lunch sometime. So I said, that's funny because I'm in pajamas still. And my mom just sort of waved her hand at me like, oh, yeah, I didn't have time to get you dressed and stuff. We had to get out of the house.
Yeah.
But I felt better as a mom myself.
Right. That's quite the ordeal, though. Like, yeah, that's such a weird thought to like.
It's kind of frightening for a 3-year-old because you don't know exactly what's going on.
Right.
And when they moved the house, it was a lot smaller, and my dad added on to the house after it was put on its new foundation.
Yeah. Very cool.
It was a nice house.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then, after you graduated high school, where'd you go next?
I got a job at the county courthouse. I had met my husband when I was 17.
Okay.
And so I got married when I was 19.
Wow.
Moved to Florida. And he worked for Pratt & Whitney Aircraft. So
Okay.
I got a job we were in West Palm Beach. And my brother lived there also. So I
Okay.
had some family. And one of his friends worked at the bank in Palm Beach, and he said that the law office up above on the second floor was looking for a receptionist, and would I be interested in interviewing? So I needed to do something, so I just went down there and drove to Palm Beach by myself. I was scared to death. It is an island, and they have a drawbridge to let the sailboats back and forth.
Yeah.
And I remember one morning going to work. I was late, and so I was speeding, and all of a sudden I realized the lights were blinking, for the bridge to open. And I saw the barrier go down behind my car.
Oh, no.
And I was in like a little Spitfire sports car. So I thought, I'm going to die. I'm going to fall in the water because the bridge is going to open, and where am I going to go? Anyway, there was plenty of clearance, and I sat there shaking, and finally the boat went through, and the bridge closes up again, and I'm back on the road. But that was very scary. So I worked for a law firm that had 7 attorneys, and I had to say each of their names, plus good morning or good afternoon.
With every phone call?
Yep. And the number was close to a number that was called the Seaboard Railroad, and people would call they wanted to get tickets on the train. So I would go through this long dissertation, good afternoon, Williamson, Gunster, Yoakley, Kreiser, and Stewart. And they would say, is this the Seaboard Railroad? Or they'd say, what? So I'd have to say it again. Anyway, my husband called me one time to tease me, and I had had several calls during the day, so I hung up, and he called back, and he says, you're not very nice on the phone. So anyway, we lived in Florida for 2 years, and then he got a job with Boeing, so that brought us out here.
Okay.
Out to the Pacific Northwest.
Nice.
Which we thought we'll spend a couple years, and see mountains, and never seen mountains if you live in Texas.
Yeah.
So we ended up, I got pregnant along the way, so we ended up having our first child here.
Okay.
And then, we were still here. We came in 1967, and we were still here in 2020.
Nice. Very cool. What was that like for you guys? Because that's a pretty big change, one side to the other.
Very big change. The first Christmas we were here, I think we arrived in August.
Okay.
And the weather was nice, and then winter came on, and we had a white Christmas.
Wow, yeah.
We were so impressed, we thought, we'll never leave here. And then it took, I think, maybe 25 years before we had another white Christmas.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's pretty rare.
But, we loved, Texas and the South and Florida. There's lots of snakes and bugs and the humidity, which just kills you. And so it was so nice up here, and no mosquitoes at the time. I know now they're coming in, but no humidity to complain about. And so we enjoyed the climate. Yeah.
Well, and the difference in like the number and quantity and like denseness of mosquitoes is drastically different.
Yes. I mean, you can't sit outside
in
Texas because you'll get eaten alive.
Mm-hmm.
You can spray and put on stuff, and it just doesn't work.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, they're big.
Uh-huh.
So after our son was born, we moved to Bellevue. We bought a new house, and moved to Bellevue, and had 2 more kids there. And he left Boeing to do some data processing type work for a company in Olympia, from
Okay.
Multnomah County. And then he got kind of tired of that, commuting for that. And so he went to the headhunter in Bellevue to see if they could find him a job.
Okay.
And they said he was overqualified and would he be interested in working for them. So he became a headhunter
Okay.
for data processing.
Okay.
So he did that for several years, and then he partnered up with another guy that worked there to form their own company in Seattle.
Okay.
So he did that for several years, and they ended up, we came to Camano for a weekend, or not a weekend, a week.
Okay.
And my husband didn't want to take the time off, so he brought my daughter and I. She was in high school. dropped us off at it's the little beach houses over on.
Like Cama Beach, or
No, it's where the park is. Can't think of the name of it. Sunrise, or
because there's like Iverson out this
it's
way.
Iverson Beach.
Okay. Yeah.
So she and I spent the week just being beachcombers.
Yeah.
And had such a great time. So he came back on Saturday to pick us up. That was when the rental was over.
Yep.
And so we told him, oh, we need to find a place out here. It's so nice. And so we started driving around, and I recognized a name on a yard sign.
Mm-hmm.
I said, I've been to this house before. This was my neighbor's sister that lived there.
Okay.
My neighbor in Bellevue.
Wow.
And she had brought me out here for lunch one time to meet her sister. And so we pulled in, and her sister and her husband were both home.
Mm-hmm.
She remembered me, and I said that we just spent the week and we'd had such a great time. We were thinking that we should maybe find a place out here. So she says, oh, I know a realtor. Let me call him. And she called this realtor. He came over, showed us this property.
Yeah.
And two other properties. But the one that we decided we liked was, he says, well, why don't we just make a ridiculous offer? So we made a ridiculous offer. And he called the next day and said that it was accepted. So we were just like, what? What have we done, So we ended up buying the property, and then we did some clearing. There was no structure on it.
Mm-hmm.
So we did some clearing and then ran into bad weather, and a couple years later started getting serious about building a house there.
Yeah.
So at that time, my husband's business, they decided they wanted to get out of the business and retire.
Mm-hmm.
So their business was for sale. And we started building the house. It took us 2 years. And in that time, his business sold.
Okay.
And so he retired. So he was 51.
Okay.
And he had 20 years of retirement before he had his stroke. So he bought a tractor, he got a dog, he bought some more property. So he would just play gentleman farmer all day. And he joined the band Camano Junction that played at the center.
Mm-hmm.
They had once a month dances, big band.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he was in that. And he had 20 years of just doing what he wanted. So that was my only recompense for him having the stroke, was that he had all that time to
Yeah.
enjoy, which I don't know anybody else that's ever had that.
Yeah.
So anyway, I started taking art lessons at the community center,
Okay.
the blue building. That's
Yes. Yeah.
yeah. So Michelle, what's Michelle? Her last name. Anyway, I started taking watercolor classes, and I met April Nelson.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I used to not paint, just watch her paint because she was so good. So I did that for a while, and then I joined CAA.
Okay.
And I don't think I was in the first studio tour. I was in the second studio tour, and then I was in all of them for the next 18 years.
Okay.
So that made me paint. I don't have any formal education in art.
Okay.
I used to draw a lot when I was a child, and I would draw my own models and put my own dresses on them, you know.
Yeah.
And sometimes the paper route, if they had an extra paper from the Houston, it was the Houston Chronicle, they would throw it in our yard, and I would just devour it because there would be huge full-page ads for like Foley's, which was a huge department store, and they would have these models, you know, in these clothing, and so I would draw them on my paper. So I was always interested in drawing, and I think that was probably something my brother, my younger brother, liked to draw also.
Okay.
So I think it was something in the family somewhere.
Very cool. So then, when you started doing drawing, so you started with watercolor then, right?
I did.
Okay. And then, once you started getting into it and doing it more often, were there any sort of like classes or mentors or people that you would talk with and try and learn more and things like that?
Well, there's so many artists on the island, so it's easy to find somebody.
Yeah.
Mostly, you know, I would be in the AAUW shows and met a lot of artists through that. And then going to the meetings, the art group, CAA.
Yep.
I mean, you make friends fast there.
Yeah.
And I still have some of those friends, you know, that I first met when I moved here.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was, you know, I did, you know, did a lot of videos, and I have tons of art books. I think one of your questions was, when did I start my career? I never did. Yeah. I just paint for fun, and I paint because I like it, and I paint what I like, and other people like it too, so they ended up buying it. So that's just sort of how it evolved.
Yeah.
And then I started making cards from my, if they were small enough to fit on my scanner, I would scan the original and then transfer it to my computer to Pages and use a template and make a card. And I print all my cards myself.
Okay.
So if I see something that I think is going to really be a good seller, I'll make a card out of it right away.
Yeah.
Or sometimes it'll be like I just painted a little bush tipped, and it's so cute, and I just love it. So it's like I have to make this for myself.
Yeah.
So one of my things during Lent, I'm a Catholic, is to try to send a card every day to somebody.
Okay.
Just to let them know I'm thinking of them and thankful for their friendship and that type of thing.
Yeah.
So
that's great.
It's fun to do.
Nice. Well, and so for anyone that hasn't seen your art has a lot of around like birds and nature. Where did that kind of come from? Why did you take that approach?
When we started coming to Camano, working on the house and the property, we would usually, before we kind of like never wanted to go back home, so we'd sit around and watch maybe the sunset or something, and there would be so many birds. I had a little pan that I put water in, and they'd come and take baths, and then I started throwing seed out, and they'd come for the seed, and it was so enjoyable. And there were birds. I mean, we had robins and chickadees in Bellevue, and that's all I remember. So we were getting all kinds of, you know, towhees and juncos and birds that you don't normally see in a city. Yeah. So I started, I still was drawing like flowers and landscapes, and I was lost in all of that. I couldn't really, I mean, they were okay, but I wasn't real excited about them. But I went to see John James Audubon exhibit at the Seattle Art Museum.
Okay.
And that was maybe 3, 4, 5 years after we moved here. And I just could have stayed there for 3 days looking at his work. I was so inspired by his work, and I told my husband, I said, that is where my heart is. This is what I want to do. Yeah. So I started drawing birds.
Very cool.
Not as good as Audubon, but that's my main subject now. Yeah. Is birds.
Very cool.
And so many people love birds,
Yeah.
and if it speaks to somebody or they know somebody that loves hummingbirds, they'll buy a card and send them, the hummingbird card because they know that that person likes hummingbirds.
Yeah.
So it's evolved where I'm down to 2 reps now that rep my cards. One is in Seattle and one is on the East Coast.
Okay.
And I have them all listed on my website.
Okay.
But I have about maybe 30 or 40 vendors that I send to
Okay.
that order all year round.
Yeah.
So it's a good side business for me. And at the time, it happened where a friend of mine, after my husband had a stroke, she said, you can't get your art out there, and I've done this before, so why don't I do it? Why don't I start repping your work? So she did, and
Okay.
sort of got me out there. And then another rep saw my work at a place that she had taken my stuff to, so then he wanted my work, and so it sort of just kept going.
That's great.
So it gave me something that would take my mind off of my husband's struggles.
Mm-hmm.
And he spent a good deal of time in the afternoons in bed listening to audiobooks or sleeping or whatever. So I would go upstairs and work on cards, and that was just a real release for me. And it gave me something to occupy my mind.
Yeah.
So I think it was kind of divine intervention.
Yeah.
Because it happened coincidentally with that.
And when did he had the stroke, you said 20 years later after retiring?
Yeah, he was 71. So he was a huge inspiration to me because he never gave up trying to get better.
Mm-hmm.
And he never complained about anything. I have tried to do that. I don't know how he did it because he had so much to complain about, and he never did.
Yeah.
He was quite the guy. He died in 2019.
Okay.
Right before COVID. So that was good that his family could be with him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It really hurts my heart that these people that can't be with their loved ones, when they're in the hospital dying. Terrible.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's definitely something they haven't. It's hard to figure out the best route for that, but it's just not. There's got to be some way because it's so difficult, and these people who are in nursing homes and all these different things where they have to be so careful, but at the same time, it's so difficult for them because many of them don't understand what's going on. And
I know.
Yeah.
I pray for those families.
Yeah.
For them to have for people to give them compassion. So anyway, I'm by myself now, and I got a cat who keeps me very entertained. And I have my garden to keep me busy in the summer, so I spend a lot of time out there. And the woods, I have about 800 feet of woods before you get to the road.
Okay.
So after my husband died, that was like the only place that I could find peace, would be out in the woods, cleaning up branches and raking and I would see some unusual little birds coming, The wrens, of course, have this one area on my property that's off limits.
Mm-hmm.
So if you get too close, they start chirping to each other, like danger, danger, danger. And so I'm like, okay, I'll leave you alone. But it's a different life, but because he lived for 8 years after his stroke.
Yeah.
And I was alone a lot of that time,
Mm-hmm.
while he was asleep or listening to books. I'd be out in the garden by myself, So I was kind of like conditioned to be alone.
Mm-hmm.
Plus I grew up almost like an only child.
Right.
So I spent a lot of time. I'm very comfortable with myself. I don't have to be entertained by people.
Yeah.
I have my art and my cooking and my garden, my house to take care of, so I don't have enough time in the day, to do everything I want.
Right.
As long as my body holds out, I'm fine.
Yep. Very cool. Yeah, I do think that like nature and being out there and stuff like that, like it just there's definitely like a calmness, and a lot of people say that about Camano when they come to Camano
Yeah.
and they walk the beaches and they're take the trails down at Iverson or other places, Barnum Point. It's that relaxing like.
Yeah.
getting
There's a
reconnected.
term, a Japanese term called kinrin. What is it? Kinrin-yoshu. It's called forest bathing.
Yes, I've heard of this.
Shinrin-yoku. That's
Okay.
what it is.
Yeah.
And it's just being in nature, and there's endorphins that come from the bark of trees,
Mhm.
and there's all this energy that accumulates that you find in your soul.
Yeah.
It soothes you.
Right.
And that's exactly what happened to me. I just felt so at peace in the woods,
Yeah.
and it was quiet.
Yeah. Very cool. Do you guys still have, or is the family farm still in the family?
The one in Texas?
Yeah, the one that was in Texas?
No, that was sold. We had it for a long time, and then it was rented out, and then it was sold.
Mhm.
My sister is the only one that lives close
Okay.
enough to check on it, and it became a burden.
Yeah.
So it was time to move past.
Yeah.
But I still have great memories of that place, and I kind of didn't want to see it after I left.
Yeah.
It
Yeah,
just-
actually, my wife, or like, I guess when you have a house like that, like that has so many dear memories there, you get that like once you leave, and if it starts changing or someone buys it and starts modifying, like any of that, like it's easier for people to not see those changes and to
I
not
know.
have to come
My
back.
sister told me that he had brought a bunch of, metal junk and stuff on the yard, and I said, "Don't tell me. I don't want to see a picture. I just want to remember it the way it was when I left."
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. No, that's good. And then where are all your kids? Are they all throughout the States or?
my oldest son lives in Vancouver, Washington.
Hmm.
He works for Alaska Airlines, right across the river. So,
Okay.
he doesn't like Oregon, so we refused to live in Oregon. So he lives right across the river. And then my middle son lives in Bellevue.
Okay.
So I see him and his family more than anybody. They still come for, holiday vacation or
Yeah.
holidays, dinners and stuff. And during the summer too. And then my daughter, she just visited. She lives in Del Mar, California.
Okay.
So she was here for a week. And I know you're going to ask me what I would put on a sign.
Yeah, on a billboard?
I think this was on a billboard once. It says, "Come here and do nothing." Do you remember that?
Huh.
Come to Camano and do nothing.
Yeah, I don't remember that one.
And it's like, that's what we did. We did nothing.
Yeah.
We lounged in our PJs and had late breakfasts and watched the birds out the window.
Yeah.
And then she'd sit and read, and I did some painting, and we went to Barnum Point, but it was so muddy.
Yes.
We couldn't walk the trails. I was just sliding all
Yeah,
over the place.
yeah.
So we came back home, and that's the only place we went.
Yeah.
And I said, on taking her to the airport, I said, "I'm sorry we didn't go out more." And she says, "Mom, that's exactly what I wanted to do, was what we did."
Nice.
So
Very cool.
I think that coming here and doing nothing is not exactly nothing, but it's seeing other things and appreciating, the beauty of a sunset and the waves and the sound of the waves and walking on the beach, and just that's nothing.
Right.
It's not like we have to go to a restaurant, or we have to go do this, or we have to go to a show.
Right.
You don't do any of that stuff. So you're forced to just get back to nature.
Yeah, and slow down. I think
Yeah.
that's something we don't do
That's
enough in
true.
our lives.
Yeah, the pandemic has really taught people about that.
Yes. Yeah. Talk about a forced slowdown.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And then you're also the featured artist upstairs in the Loft at the marketplace. Tell us about the artwork that you're bringing in and yeah.
Well, it's artwork that I have done previously because I haven't painted like in a year. I don't know if I don't think I've painted since my husband passed away. And I think it's like I'm not forcing myself to do it because I'll know when I'm ready. In fact, when my daughter was here, she was reading, and I was sitting in the sun, and I painted this little bird that I told you about on this card, and that was the first thing I painted, and it felt good to do it. And I'm going to be on the studio tour, so I have to get my butt busy painting. But I forgot your question now.
Just the art that you're bringing into the loft.
Oh, to the loft. Yeah. It's 2 larger pieces. I'm working with fabric now in my paintings. Some people think I painted that, but it's a piece of fabric. And it actually, on the cards, it reproduces so well that people try to touch it thinking that it's really fabric on the card. And that happened kind of by accident because I like to use rubber stamps, and I paint them with acrylic.
Okay.
And stamp them onto my paper.
Yes, yeah.
Then when they dry, you can add more. Usually I'll pick some bird or something to put on that stamp, and then I can pull the colors from the bird with watercolors on top of the acrylic.
Oh, okay.
So I had done a really good bird, and I did not like the way the stamp turned out, and I couldn't get it right, and I didn't want to sacrifice the bird, so I took it upstairs and started pulling fabrics and papers and laces and all kinds of things to cover it. And I found this one piece of fabric that I had bought at an Asian quilt shop, and it had all the colors of the bird, and so I thought, I'm going to glue this over the stamp. So I did that, and I love the way it turned out. And it's one of my best-selling cards.
Nice.
Yeah, so I started getting, I used to sew, and my mother used to quilt. So I've been around fabrics all my life. And so, except for the last 30 years, I haven't. So going into a fabric store now is all exciting to me again. And I buy these little pieces, like a quarter yard, and I actually made a lot of masks out of the leftovers.
Okay.
But that's kind of it's kind of the thing that excites me right now. So most of the pieces up there have fabric in them.
Nice. Very cool. Well, very cool. So if anyone hasn't, come up to the loft and check out Betty's, she's the featured artist up there. So there's a big wall of all of her art up there. So be sure to check that out. All right. Well, we already did one of these, but I like to end every podcast with some rapid-fire questions. So the first one is, what purchase of $100 or less have you made in the last 3 months that you've enjoyed the most?
Well, I thought about that, and I think the thing I've enjoyed the most are these handmade watercolors by a company, a little husband and wife shop. They grind the soils from Colorado.
Oh, okay.
And they make them into watercolors.
Wow.
So you get some really earthy, granular type stuff. So I think that's probably been the thing I've enjoyed the most. Because everything else is like from Amazon, and it's like paper towels and things like that.
Nothing exciting. All right. Pretend you have a friend coming from out of town. What would their first day look like here?
Well, I actually did have a couple of classmates from high school that I hadn't seen since my wedding.
Wow.
They came to the studio tour. They had heard it was my last time that I was having it in my house. And, the second weekend of the tour is not on Friday. It's only Saturday, Sunday.
Yep.
But people don't know that. So a lot of times people show up on Friday, the second weekend.
Okay.
So I was all dressed, had my makeup on, house was clean. Knock, knock at the door. Okay. I see this couple standing out there. And I open the door and I says, hi. I says, what can I do for you guys? And they said, they didn't say anything. And I said, did you think the tour was today? Because a lot of people do. And I says, actually, if you want to come in, my stuff is up. You can come in. And they said, no. So then I thought, well, why are they here? So then the guy says, Betty, do you recognize us? And I said, oh, I meet so many people on the tour for the last 18 years. And I said, they know me because it's easy to...
Yes.
But I said, I can't remember everybody's faces and names. I'm so sorry, And he announced their names, and they were my high school classmates. And
Wow.
I jaw dropped. I could not believe it. He says, I can't believe you didn't recognize this. Well, he was in our wedding with black hair, and he's totally white hair now. And I recognized her voice. If she had spoken, I would have known who she was.
Yeah.
But she didn't say a word the whole time. Yeah. She let him do the talking.
Oh.
So they were staying at a little B&B down the road.
Yeah.
So the next day they came over. We went... I think we went to here to get coffee.
Yeah.
And I showed him the bakery. We're so proud of the bakery. And so then we drove around the island, went to Cama Beach.
Yeah.
And I think we ended up coming home, or we may have gone to Anacortes or something. I was trying to show them all the water things around here. They could not believe how green it is here.
Yeah.
I don't know how many times he said, it's so green here.
So do they still live down there then?
Yeah. They live outside of Fort Worth.
Wow. Okay.
And it's very brown there in
Yes.
the winter. So they absolutely loved it. They were so impressed. I mean, he said to me, I had to come and see what kept a girl out of Texas all these years. And he says, I see what it is, and shaking his head, yeah, I can see why you like it here. So I think the island, we have all these parks now.
Yeah.
And so it's easy to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And just driving around and showing them the different scenery, because it changes. My lot view is different from my neighbor's lot view.
Yeah.
So we, hung out. They were here for 2.5 days. The next day, we had leftovers and sat out by the water. We're up on a high bank, but we have a little dining platform out there.
Nice.
So they just loved the breeze and
Yep.
the cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's probably, I would replicate that again.
Very cool. All right. Who is an interesting or fascinating person in this community that I should interview next?
Well, I know that I'm not sure which artists have been upstairs.
I think just John Ebner. The Dorseys used to be up there. Jed Dorsey and Renee. And then John Ebner was our first featured artist up there in January.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, do you know Val Paul Taylor?
No.
He does sort of caricature type art.
Okay.
He's in the Stanwood Guild. He's actually a CAA. He joined now. Once you see one of his paintings, you sort of recognize his work. He draws kind of like, I would call him crazy, although he may not think it's crazy. But he'll have a guy walking, and it'll have all these birds, and it's called the oyster catchers or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
And it's comical.
Yeah.
Very, very, very talented guy.
Okay.
I think you would enjoy having his work up here at the Loft.
Yeah. Very cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you.
All right. And Islanders, I will talk to you on the next one. Well, a big thank you to Betty Dorotik for joining me on the podcast today, and thank you for listening. If you haven't already, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform. It really helps us be found by other Islanders like yourself. And for more information on this episode, you can go to CamanoCommons.com/EP84. That's CamanoCommons.com/EP84. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.